Well, if you think these, all of these individuals tonight with all the credentials that you have and all the lighting designs that have been brought in here over the years, it's quite amazing to see where lighting stands today. I started, just like John, I started in lighting 53 years ago. I've been retired for 18 years. So it's really exciting to be able to come here and tell you about my background, and it's an honor to tell you about Larry Comer and my association with him and his accomplishments. So with all of the education and the background in here, when I interviewed with Larry Comer, Larry was looking for somebody with a little lighting experience and some technical knowledge, and I didn't have either one of those. I came from a marketing and sales and a health and beauty aid company. Our number one product was Vaseline petroleum jelly. We had about 74% marketing share, and if you use a little imagination, you can imagine what most of that Vaseline petroleum jelly was used for. So little did I know that when Larry hired me and gave me the opportunity to move into lighting, that all of the marketing and sales skills I had learned to sell Vaseline petroleum jelly, I would have never thought that they would have been so helpful in being successful in the lighting industry. Now, I came from 53 years ago, we just stamped out 4 sides of metal, put lamps in them. Okay, so lighting has come an awful long way since then for me. And I want to tell you that probably I came from the opposite end of the business that most of you guys came from. My experience was dealing with, in fact, your end of the business, when the specifications were out there, that the lighting designs, when they were bid in the marketplace, they were outstanding. And that's a compliment to all of you designers. But unfortunately, as I'm sure you know, when that bid goes out, there are a lot of things that happen, and sometimes you don't understand what happened, even how you lost an order or how you got it sometimes. So I came from the side of the track where you were negotiating with contractors and trying to write orders basically with your negotiations. That's when I met Larry Comer 53 years ago, and I worked very closely with Larry for 20 years. He was a remarkable man, and all of you would be glad, if you knew him, you'd be glad to call him a fellow American. Throughout those 20 years, Larry became my best friend and a brother in Christ. The first meeting I had with Larry was my wife and I had dinner with he and his wife, and I remember distinctly 4 things. This was 53 years ago, and one of them was 202 miles per hour, a dishwasher, Jonah in the whale, and Tarzan. Now, as far as the 202 miles per hour, that was the speed his Ferrari was supposed to attain. But it only attained 176 miles an hour, and I was amazed to realize that he was the one behind the wheel. The dishwasher was something my wife and I, trying to be good guests, cleaned the table and loaded the dishwasher. And to our amazement, a few minutes later, we saw Larry and his wife take the dishes out and rearrange the china in the dishwasher, and that was a little unsettling, to say the least. Jonah in the whale, we'd had a discussion about Christianity, and Larry looked at me and he said, "Well, son, do you really believe Jonah was swallowed by a whale?" And I said, Mr. Comer, in the Old Testament, the Hebrew word is great fish. And I do believe he was swallowed by a great fish because Christ, in the book of Matthew, referred to this story as a foreshadowing of his death, burial, and resurrection. Well, there was a complete silence for about 5 minutes, and I realized I'd really screwed up with my answer that evening at dinner. As it turned out, it wasn't. Larry also, he had a sense of humor. His best friends called him Tarzan. He was not an intimidating physical stature, but his wife's name was Jane. So for those of you that didn't catch that, I'll explain it to you when I get through. Larry was born in Plains, Georgia, a little southwest Georgia town, population 500 people. He had a normal upbringing. His father, Fred, was a postman. His mother, Bert, I called her Mama Bert. She was a very disciplined, faithful woman. I called her a prayer warrior. And I can tell you that she was the foundation and the bedrock of all the success that Larry achieved in lighting. And the old saying, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world, it definitely is true, and it was true in the life of Larry Comer. One day, Mama Bert showed me her prayer booklet, and it was quite extensive. And she'd have the date she requested, something of the Lord, and the date it was answered. Quite amazing moment. Then she pointed at me and she said, son, I want you to look at this request. This was 3 years before I even knew who Larry was. And she said, I prayed on this day that God would send a Christian man to influence my son. And you're the one. And I said, holy moly, I don't know how to respond to that. I thought Larry had hired me because of my talent, my education, my experience. And lo and behold, I'd ended up there on a wing and a prayer from Mama Bert. So Larry was a Georgia Tech man. Randy, you're an Alabama man, right? You claim that? Hey, okay. He's I'm a Georgia Bulldog, so you be careful I say that. But Larry spent 2 years in the Pacific Fleet as a Navy ensign. Returned to Atlanta. He went to work for the enemy. Lithonia. Lithonia was my enemy all of my life, and Larry, as he was there at Lithonia, he told me he had his first life experience. He was standing on 2 pallets with a microphone, and he was addressing 600 plant employees, and he basically said that while he was talking with them, his sport coat just caught on fire, flamed up. He pulled it off, threw it down on the floor, stomped it out, and that was the end of his introduction to the plant employees. And he said what he learned from this was that education doesn't equal respect. Education doesn't guarantee success, but it's the value that you bring and the confidence that's rewarded to you from that. And then you can leverage that with your employees for efficiency. He started Metalux in 1965. He was, I remember he said a dentist came up to him and wrote him a check for $10,000 and said, Mr. Comer, if I was you, I'd be scared to death. And Larry said, I was holding a check for $10,000 with his signature on it, and he was the one that should have been scared to death. This is the mind of an entrepreneur spirit. 20 years later, on a cool summer morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, 3 banks in Americus, Georgia, opened. There was $30 million that was deposited into 3 banks in Americus, Georgia for 18 individuals that had invested $10,000 in Metalux. 10 years prior to that, including the dentist. That didn't include Larry's payoff. So that morning, Metalux created 25 millionaires, and the city of America's population was 15,600 people. Larry had 7 employees when he started. 20 years later, $150 million in sales, and sales in all states and globally, and sold the business to McGraw-Edison. During that period of time, Larry was recognized by Jimmy Carter as a national small businessman of the United States in 1975. In 1978, he received the Entrepreneur of the Year Award by the Georgia State Chamber of Commerce. His success spread all over the state. He was in demand to speak. He was on the vice chairman of the Business Council of Georgia and the chairman of the Georgia State Chamber of Commerce. He was able to pursue his lifelong ambitions, which were to help small business and education. He was a giver. He was not a taker. And quickly, I want to give you 3 things that many people ask me why Larry was successful. The first was his unwavering faith in God. And if you look, he drew integrity from that. If you looked him up, integrity up in the dictionary, it simply says having strong morals, the quality of being honest, and that was Larry Comer. He was brilliant. One day at lunch, he told me to write 12 things down, and I did and repeated them. He repeated them back to me very quickly, and I was pretty impressed. By the time we got to 25, 35, 45, and 47, and he repeated each one back to me, I realized I was dealing with a different type of individual. And you know, Franklin Roosevelt, the president, said, walk softly and carry a big stick. Larry's big stick was his photographic memory, and he put that to work quite often. The other trait he had was intestinal fortitude, and he taught me that being tough was not 6'6", 250-pound defensive end for the Cleveland Browns, but it was the decisions that are made between the ears. That's where toughness comes about. And then last of all, I'd tell you, somebody mentioned this earlier tonight, was common sense. And Larry said, if you can't write a plan down on a napkin, then you hadn't thought it out very well. And sometimes mine were 5 and 6 pages long, which would drive you back to really think about what it was you were proposing. Larry would walk through all the plants. He knew the names of most of the employees, all the employees in the offices. He'd pat them on the back, shake their hand, and thank them for their contribution to the company. That's the kind of man that Larry Comer was. He'd often say, is the risk worth the gain? If we don't make it and it doesn't work, do we have the capital to sustain the business? And I want to tell you that Larry, of all the titles that he had, the one that he most cherished was grandfather of 6 grandchildren. I submit to you that being married 61 years to the same woman should be up there in that category also. On July the 28th of last year, Larry passed away, and I'm sure that he was ushered into heaven by the Lord. And I just say that the world is a lot better off, a lot better place because of Larry Comer's unselfishness. Thank you all.
I'm Sara. I'm the youngest of 3 kids. And I'd like to thank everyone with the Edison Report for nominating Dad for this. Our mom that he mentioned, Jane, she just turned 88. So she was not able to make the trip here from Georgia, but she's really excited that Dad is receiving this award. And she really was a big part of the Metalux story and a big support for Dad. Also, our brother Brandon, he was not able to make the trip. and his wife Kim, and his kids Davis and Delaney, and we miss having them here. But with me here tonight is my sister Lauren over here, and her daughter Sarah Beth, and then my husband Charles. And it's pretty special that our kids' first airplane ride and first trip to New York City is to see their granddad get this award, Charlotte and Lauren. So when Metalux was sold, I was about 7 years old, so it's safe to say I don't remember too much about the Metalux years. I do remember that the Rolos in the vending machine were really good, and we would get orange Gatorade from the little fridge in Dad's office, and I thought that was pretty cool. So really my memories from Metalux are a little different from most people. Dad lived an entire lifetime before I was even born. He grew up in Americus, Georgia. He went to Georgia Tech, served in the Navy. Then, of course, he went back to Georgia Tech and then started out with Lithonia Lighting before striking out on his own to start Metalux. He really, really loved Metalux. He loved the people. He loved what it became. I learned so much from him over the years. He told us about Metalux all the time. And he also would walk in places and restaurants and look up at the ceiling everywhere we went. But he really loved the idea of business, and he was a true entrepreneur at heart. He always said that he believed in the free enterprise system, and he spent his later years really helping entrepreneurs build and grow their businesses. And it really came natural to him. He was passionate about it, and he was always continuing to learn and read and stay involved and active. I think it meant a lot to Dad getting to share things that he learned running Metalux with other people. And after Metalux, he had Caravelle boats for a few years, so he really did love manufacturing and creating things. He always said the purpose of a business is to create customers, and he loved applying that and other business principles with people that he helped. He did, as Mr. Miller said, Dad passed away last summer at the age of 89, and to some that seems like a long time, but it wasn't quite long enough. He would be really honored to receive this award. And the lighting industry was very special to him, and he'd been out of it for a long time, but he still loved it. So we really thank you so much.